Okay, we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Live from the Sword Coast podcast. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be, this is D9. I'm not going to be your friendly dungeon master today, but this is entry 9 in the RPG a Day exercise for 2017. This is the first one you're watching, which I'm guessing you're not. Then this is an exercise where every day for the month of August in 2017, we're answering a different question based about role-playing games or our experience with them or whatnot. So today's question is, what is a good RPG to play for about 10 sessions? So as with many other of my answers, I want to provide some context to the answer here, or at least to my answer. So to be honest, like, there's not a game that you can't play for 10 sessions. There's no, I mean, setting aside all other factors, any game is I think equal in terms of whether 10 sessions or 11 sessions or 9 sessions are good or not. So because I've picked, but I guess rather than giving such a kind of broad, useless answer, what I decided to do is to think, okay, so beyond the experience of the actual play and the story that will develop and the goals your characters will achieve and whatnot, to what games would provide a mechanical heft to or a mechanical structure to those 10 or 9 to 11 sessions. So that's where I went with. So my answers are going to sound, they're not necessarily all level-based games, but 2 of the 3 I'm going to mention actually are. So that's why I've mentioned these 3 games, but that's not to say that any other game wouldn't be a terrific example. If I had 10 sessions and that was it, I could probably write a pretty great Mage game, a Mage the Ascension game to run, or a Star Wars RPG or whatever. I mean, there's not really because they're, I guess any game would fit within the 10 sessions or 10 sessions or so. What I decided to do is go beyond that and think about whether there are mechanical aspects to the game that would support that framework of just 10 sessions. So the first one I'll mention is I think probably for those who may be familiar with the channel, a pretty obvious answer of mine. That is Shadow of the Demon Lord. This is a role-playing game published by Schwalbe Entertainment that I've been running for coming up on a year now. This is a dark fantasy, actually let me phrase that, it is a dark horror fantasy game, with the emphasis being on that it's a horror game before it is a fantasy game. The game features technically 11 levels of play. You start off as 0 level characters with just professions who kind of are thrown into the wider world of adventure, and then you level up to a max of 10th level. There are optional rules out of a supplement called Forbidden Rules that expand that beyond. They give you ways of playing beyond 10th level, but at default level of play in the core book, you're playing your characters from 0 to 10. Yeah, so I guess another aspect to it too is that the titular Demon Lord mentioned in the title here is a feature that they suggest strongly play in your campaign. So when you're running Shadow Demon Lord at the outset, what you can do is either decide yourself or roll randomly how the Shadow of the Demon Lord manifests. So for instance, in the game that I run, we rolled at the outset because I wanted to try the random stuff, and I like, as a DM, having to respond to random elements in the game. We rolled that the Dark Fade, that basically the shadow that was creeping over the world was affecting the Fae. So that's been what our game's been about, is how the Fae are starting to be more malicious and malevolent, and they're trying to basically infringe on the mortal world. Similarly, I played a Shadow of the Demon Lord game that went from 0 to 10, run by my buddy Jared Rashner, and I'll provide a link in the links below. We played that as an actual play on YouTube, or Google Hangouts technically, but I'll provide a link to his sessions. And he ran it in 11 sessions. We did 11 sessions, 1 level for each, and it was great. So I guess one of the reasons why I think this would be a lot of fun, I guess I've had fun playing it that way. So that's where I would suggest that it's good that way. But one of the reasons particularly it was fun is because with each level in this game, you get to make really interesting choices for your character. I've started, I mean, I may be stealing this from someone else that I've read so far, but there are so many games that feature, I guess the reason they're popular with a certain kind of player is because there is more to the game than what's happening at the table. For instance, Pathfinder is a game that has an enormous amount of mechanical crunch to it, both in play and in your character creation. But for a certain kind of player who likes, mixing, min-maxing a character, or coming up with a sort of an optimized idea, or even just executing a theme for the character through the rules in play or the rules available. There's more to the game than just what's happening at the table. There's more for them to do in between. And to a very, very more simplified degree, that's what's featured in this. When you're making your characters and you're playing through, you will make 3 key decisions for your character as to what their expert path is, what their, let me see here, their novice path, which is sort of like your basic, you pick one from 4 basic sort of classes. And then you pick an expert path, which is sort of a specialized version, but that doesn't necessarily have to link up with your first choice. So if you chose, say, warrior on your first thing, it wouldn't prevent you from becoming a wizard at level 3. And then the final choice you make is for your master path. And then within that, there's other specific decisions you can make for your character in between for each of those levels. So it makes it for a really fun game in terms of like theory crafting a character. And if you know that you're going to be playing through in those specific levels, I prefer to respond to what's happening in the game and then decide where this character is going to go. And that's what I did with my character, who started off as a slave and ended up becoming this, what was he? He was a ranger scald. He was a half giant kind of character. But I mean, like, if you are the type that really likes doing that theory crafting stuff and planning your character from the get-go from 0, and recognizing that lethality is a real problem in the game. Not a problem, but it's a very real threat, I should say. That would be a lot of fun. So 10 sessions or 11, 11 sessions it would take for this. This would be a terrific option, I think. It's a really, really fun game. It plays really well at the table in the sense that it moves along very quickly. The mechanics are very simple and easy to wrap your head around. And it features a lot of the sort of signature tropes of fantasy role-playing games, but with a real dark fantasy kind of twist to them. So I love it. Like I've had a lot of fun running it. I've had a lot of fun playing it. So this would be a really excellent choice. Plus, this is really all you need. The game is a terrifically done in one game book. There are a bunch of supplements for the game that you can choose to to pick up. But the ones I think that you have your options. So like here's, just because I have them handy, this is a bunch of here's the print books that are out so far, not including the most recently, at the time of recording, the Freeport Companion. But really the only one that I, for myself personally, found was absolutely kind of necessary because it was interfering with the way I enjoyed the game was the Forbidden Rules supplement. And the reason I really like this one is because it gives you an option for using a mana style casting pool rather than using it's not quite Vancian magic that's in this where you're memorizing your spells, but it's very, very close to that. You have each spell, you have to track how many times per day you can cast it in the default thing. It's not a deal breaker. It's still totally playable. And before Forbidden Rules came out, this is how I ran it. And I was perfectly satisfied. Just that's one small aspect of the rules that I feel is it really, really improved. It made it exactly the game I wanted to run. So that's option 1. Option 2 is a similar, all my options actually are going to be fantasy games. So forgive me for limiting my options to such a narrow band here. But option 2 will be 13th Age. Now this game, it came out shortly before 5th edition D&D came out. And it is touted to be kind of like if the tactical, aspects and the power aspects of 4th edition D&D went into the next stage of evolution of game design, what would that game look like? And I'm not doing it justice because the game is much more than that. But this would be your excellent option, I think, as well. You only have 10 levels in the game, and you could really run a great, 1 level per session. It's very similar to the way I suggested that 13th Age would be run. I'm sorry, that Shadow of the Demon Lord would be run. The game does not require, unlike 4th edition, it doesn't require an actual tabletop or a miniature mat or something like that to play through. It's very, very narrative driven, the combat. The characters also, one thing I really like about it is that the players and the characters get to dictate a lot about the world. So it's recommended that at the end of each, you don't necessarily come with a pre-packaged world, and you let it evolve as the characters are making their, as the players are making their characters. And then in the course of play, there will be things that are introduced in the course of the session that at the end, you guys do sort of a poll and say, all right, well, in this session, we learned that, orcs actually have gills. They're amphibians. So do we want to, is that going to be true for the world, or is that just this thing? And then everyone will decide. You can also play this in like really any style of sort of fantasy play you want. It's wide open, and the broad principles of the game still work. And while that may seem like a lot of work for the DM, I have not found that the few times I've had a chance to run this, I've not found that to be the case. There's also a great deal of customization in many of the classes. There's a supplement that came out called 13 True Ways that introduced, in addition to a bunch of optional rules, it also gave the druid a commander, which is sort of like a new version of the warlord, and the monk. And this really, I'm not sure this is necessary, but it's a really nice supplement to have if you're running a 13th Age game. In particular, I had one player in my games who regularly plays, Jeff, who loves playing monks in the games, but they've never really quite fit the way that he was hoping that monks would play, where there's this sort of, he wants it to be more like it's not, I don't mean like a fighting video game, but like to have that kind of combo style that is played in. So there's more tactical kind of crunch to it, which also gives some narrative, interesting, things. I'm using my, striking palm technique and then my exploding star punch to set up, and the monk plays very, very much like that in this. It's really cool, and it captures that kind of setup approach, punch, counter punch, finishing punch kind of stuff. The other neat things, I guess, is there are 13 I think they're called icons in the game, if I remember correctly. Let me see if it says in the back. It does not, but I think they're called the icons. And what they are is basically 13 sort of broad general descriptors of power players in the world, like the Archmage or the Dwarven King or the Elf Queen. And then your characters pick which of those things they have relationships with, so the positive, negative, or neutral relationship. And at the start of each session, you sort of roll randomly, and then anyone whose relationship is triggered, that will play an element in the game. So there's a cool improv aspect to it as well. And one final thing I'll say about just the game in general too is each character, in addition to playing their class and whatever else, each character has a unique thing, one unique thing. And what that is basically, some of the examples they give are things like, you have a clockwork heart. It's a non-combat related thing, non-mechanical benefit. It's just something really unique about your character. You're the heir to the dragon throne. You are a angel stripped of its immortality, or something like that. And some of the stuff that my players have come up with has been just awesome, like really great stuff that totally drove the story and the campaign. So I think that this game would suit really well for that, because you do see there is distinct like power bands or tiers as you're leveling up too. So you could really go from relatively low powered, exciting, street level, I guess is the superheroes version of it, play, to, movers, massively powerful movers and shakers, upper level games. And the game doesn't seem to break down at those higher levels either. So you could effectively play those, you still play those through and have a lot of fun with it. So, so that's my suggestion for 13th Age. I should finally say as well too, for those who are more familiar with 4th edition D&D, combat in this plays a lot faster than it does in 4th edition D&D. So you don't need to worry about your 10 sessions just effectively being 10 combat encounters. So that's suggestion 2. And then my third suggestion is something I haven't had a chance to run in a while, but we've got it sort of on deck in the near future, and that's the Iron Kingdoms role-playing game. Now, this has been out for a number of years now. This came out near the end of the life cycle of 4th edition D&D, but well before 5th edition came out. And it was the publisher's Privateer Press. It was their effort to try and put out a role-playing game that wasn't based on D&D, because the Iron Kingdoms setting, which is as you can see in the picture here, is kind of a steampunk and sorcery setting, complete with inhuman races like the Trollkin and giant, kind of robot or magical robots called Stormjacks. And it's set in really kind of a almost Victorian era with the predominant theme of war, kind of hanging over the whole kingdom. But it was originally published for 3rd edition D&D. The setting was started off with a series of modules, and then grew into a campaign setting for 3.5. And in and around that time, they started releasing a series of miniature games, and the miniature games exploded. War Machines and Hordes are phenomenally powerful, popular games. So what Privateer Press decided to do at some point was, rather than release yet another version of the game of the role-playing game for one of the Dungeons and Dragons iterations, they decided to release a game that was based mechanically largely off their war game, so that it would be easy for, if you played their war games or you're familiar with them, it would be an easy transition into this. Because of that, it does have there are certain elements of it that do feel very wargamey, but I mean, to be honest, any role-playing game that isn't just strictly a narrative game is going to have that element of wargaminess to it. So it's easy to ignore. We ran it very theater of the mind for most of the time we played, and when we did play a really tactical encounter, it was helpful to have miniatures for this game in the same way that it is for most games that have any kind of tactical depth to them. Like Pathfinder 3rd edition D&D, or 4th edition D&D, or whatever. So why I think this would be an interesting game is related to for a 10-session play, is related to the way that you get XP in this. So the way you advance as a character is you gain a random amount of experience points, and then I shouldn't say random, it's an amount determined by the DM, obviously. But as you gain experience points, you will be given, there's not actually levels in this, there are tiers of play. There's the heroic tier, the veteran tier, and then the epic tier. What you do is you go through, let me see if I can get this in there, there we go, this chart here. And as you gain XP, you will get new choices to make for your character. So those things will include like more occupational skills, more combat skills, more spells or feats or abilities, and so forth. So, and it's regimented by the amount of XP that you have. So to reach the end of heroic tier, you would need 50 XP. And that would get you, I think, about 15 different options you'd be choosing throughout that period. So what I would suggest, the way I would recommend running this for a 10-session thing or 11-session thing is you just give 5 XP at the end of each session. So what that would mean is that at the end of the first session, then the players, after getting familiar with their characters, they'd get to pick 2 new occupational skills, and then they get to pick new spell or an ability or a connection or a military skill. And it's neat that the game front loads some of those options, and then it slowly tapers them off. So you get a chance to start crafting that character and getting used to building, making some modifications and increasing your skills or whatever. And then, but it doesn't overwhelm you with the sheer amount of choices. Those trickle off as you get higher in level or get more experience points. So, and that I think would be great. Like my players really, that was one of the selling points I had for the game when we initially started running it, and the players loved it because they were, you got to see the characters advance, and even if you weren't a theory crafter who had your character built till the nth, till the end of the epic tier, people still knew what they wanted next. Yeah, in almost every case, this was not a game where I had to remind people like, look, you've got 16 experience points you haven't spent yet, or you've got X amount of choices to make, and you still haven't told me what they are. Let me know so I can update your character sheet. Players knew, like they were really on top of that stuff. So To make characters in this game, just as a quick give you an idea of what the game's about before you take the plunge, if you choose to. You pick your characters by picking a race, an archetype, and then you pick 2 careers. So your race could be human or dwarf, or Iosin, which is a kind of elf, or whatever. I mean, Ogren or Gobber or Trollkin. Like, there's some really cool, unique races that are in this. Your archetype is basically a very broad descriptor of your character. They're gifted, intellectual, skilled, and mighty. You don't get abilities from your archetype as you gain experience points as well. And then you finally pick 2 careers, and those careers can run anything from, like, you know, an investigator or a gun mage or a highwayman or a arcanist, which is like a spellcaster, or a priest, a thief, a soldier, rifleman, pirate, military officer. Tons of cool ideas. And the way we were playing the game was that you picked one of those to be your current kind of profession and one of them to be your past profession. So that in that way, you sort of baked in some backstory for your character, or at least gave you some fertile ground on which to grow that. Yeah, so that's sort of the game in a nutshell. It's very, very quick to make characters, but you have really interesting, unique characters to start with. You also pick, DM can choose to give you a group as well, so if you're like investigators or you're, you know, traveling mercenaries or you're pirates, you'll get a bonus that everyone will get as well. There's also been, for 10 sessions, there has been, I can't remember when this came out. I mean, let me see here. Was it last year, 2016? This is 2016. So this came out at the time of the recording about a year and a half ago. This is an adventure. The trade publication for Privateer Press for the publishers of Iron Kingdoms is No Quarter. And in No Quarter, they did a series of adventures that were part of the same adventure path called Immortality. This is a compiled and expanded version of that. And there's about 9 sessions in this, some of which are optional. So if you didn't want to, if you're unfamiliar with the world and you didn't really want to have to come up with what, what your characters were going to play through for those sessions, this wouldn't be a bad choice to pick this and just run this adventure. From what I remember, it's an interesting adventure, and because I read it when it was coming out, and I haven't really dived into the supplement, the printed version, or the compiled version, I should say. But it features a lot of the signature elements of the Iron Kingdom setting. So, like, you fight Stormjacks, you deal with necromantic magic, you encounter weird clockwork or weird servants of the clockwork goddess. There is I can't remember what they're called. It's been quite a while, but there's a secret society of mages in one of the kingdoms, and they sort of, the Grey Lords, that's what it is. The Grey Lords are a society of mages who serve one of the kingdoms called Kador. And the main villain in this is this. Well, actually, I won't say because maybe that'll spoil things. But it's a really it features a lot of the fun signature elements that make the Iron Kingdom setting a really interesting setting. So anyway, so those are 3 suggestions for what might make for a good 10-session series of play. And as with my suggestion for the week of play and for the 2 hours of play, I'm assuming that you want to see some sort of resolution at the end of these sessions. So any 3 of those games would be, I think, a terrific option. Of the 3, the Iron Kingdoms one would probably feel less urgent. You wouldn't feel the need to get to a certain story point by the end. Whereas with Shadow Demon Lord, you would want to get adventures finished each session. So there may be a sense of urgency there. It can be done, as my buddy Jared has demonstrated, but you might still feel the need to edit stuff out or whatnot just to keep the momentum going. And same would apply, I imagine, for a 10 sessions, 10 level setup for 13th Age as well. So anyway, so those are 3 games to think about. I will include links to the publishers of those 3 games as well in the description of the video. So if you want to check them out, you can do that. Let's see what tomorrow's question will be. Tomorrow's question will be, where do you go for RPG reviews? That will be a short one. I know I've said that for about a bunch of these, and they've ended up being quite long, but that one for sure will be a short one because I think it's a pretty easy answer. So if you have any questions or comments about my suggestions in this, or if you want to share what you would do in a 10-session setup, please leave a comment in the section below, and I will be happy to read that and respond to that. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will see you folks again tomorrow for the next question. Actually, if you're watching this around the time that this is being recorded, I'll see you later tonight for Shadow of the Demon Lord. So I may see you for that. If not, then I will hope to see you at the next question.